Hi, I'm Andrew Walsh of DaytonVistas.com. I like to cover the innovation and major historical events that happened in Dayton, Ohio, and there's one sports history fact that might seem hard to believe that Dayton actually hosted the very first NFL game. Today, I'll look back at the origins and history of the Dayton Triangles, a story which involves two of Dayton's most prominent industrialists. We'll see some rare primary sources I dug up, discuss a couple of interesting players and coaches, and cover the fate of the team after it made NFL history, including what happened to the old stadium. So today, Dayton is a great sports town for college basketball, minor league baseball, and more. But despite the many passionate fans in the Gem City, having a team in a major professional league isn't a realistic possibility. But it was a different story a century ago. And the history of the Triangles actually starts at the University of Dayton, or as it was called then, St. Mary's Institute, and then St. Mary's College. But it began with basketball, not football. A club basketball team called the St. Mary's Cadets, made up of alumni and other local players, was formed in 1912 and enjoyed quite a bit of success. Here's the report from a 1912 game with a court storming. But if you read the article, fans actually stormed the court when the Cadets took a late lead, but the game wasn't over. It reads, "It was several minutes before the floor could be cleared and play resumed." In fall 1913, the players formed a football team also under the Cadets name, and they'd gradually shift their focus to the gridiron. This is the St. Mary's varsity football team as it appeared in 1911. Circled here is Al Mart, who'd play a big role on the Cadets and later the Triangles. The football cadets joined many amateur and semi-pro football teams already in the Dayton area. This was an era in which most players worked their factory jobs during the day, practiced in the evenings, and played games on the weekends to earn extra money. The cadets football team would quickly experience success too. Al Mart, who we just saw, would be the captain and quarterback. He penned this article in the Dayton Daily News where he praised the team's fullback, Babe Zimmerman. It has some great cartoons which show Zimmerman running through the line like dynamite, and that he joined the team at only 96 pounds, revealing some differences compared to football as we know it today. The Cadets football team went an undefeated 7-0 its first year, won the Dayton City Championship 3 years in a row, and won a Southern Ohio Championship. So it had already come a long way, but the team that would make NFL history came about through the efforts of prominent Dayton industrialists Edward Deeds and Charles Kettering. The duo was quite famous in Dayton, with Kettering inventing the electric starter and the two growing their company into a powerhouse employing thousands. In 1916, the cadets team was reorganized to provide a recreational outlet for employees at three companies founded by the duo: Delco, Dayton Metal Products Company, and the Domestic Engineering Company. These companies were said to form an industrial triangle of plants in downtown Dayton. Here's Delco's second factory building that had just been built in 1915, and here's a later aerial of the whole company. Delco's most significant manufacturing buildings actually survive right by the Dayton Dragons ballpark, so that's another connection between today's Dayton sports teams and Triangle's history. Now, after doing a lot of research, I believe there wasn't actually a literal triangle, as the other two companies were co-located near Monument Ave. And here's an old map of DMPC, and that area later became Frigidaire's downtown plant, which was demolished around 2008, and that area is now part of the Tech Town development. Here's a shot of the old factory being demolished. But there is also another reason for the triangle name: the field where they played. In 1916, Deeds and Kettering purchased a large plot of land north of downtown Dayton that was triangular in shape and was given the name of Triangle Park. It opened on July 4th, 1917, with a picnic for employees' families, and later that year it also became a World War I recruitment site. Here's a newspaper article where the Triangle Park Company was incorporated, and the name mentioned here, Nelson S., or Bud Talbot, will bring us back to the team itself. Talbot would be the first coach of the new squad in 1916, the nucleus of which was the cadets, with employees from the three factories rounding out the roster. He'd been an All-American tailback at Yale, and after coaching the Triangles in 1916, Bud would serve in World War I and even coach the Camp Sherman football team, which came to play the Triangles in 1917 at the Dayton Fairgrounds. Getting back to Triangle Park, here's an undated aerial view where you can see the rivers and the footprint of the football field. The new team's first game in 1916 couldn't have gone better. The Triangles beat the Cincinnati Northerns 72-0. The Triangles would later go undefeated in the 1918 season and win an Ohio League championship. Another of the Cadets' founders was Carl Stork, who'd worked as a foreman at National Cash Register and been a three-sport athlete at Stivers High School. He would be the key figure in the Triangles taking their next leap. In August and September of 1920, Stork represented the Triangles at a series of meetings held at the auto dealership of Ralph Hay, owner of the Canton Bulldogs. Those meetings established the American Professional Football Association, APFA, which would change its name to the National Football League in 1922. And the famous inaugural game of the league was held at Triangle Park on October 3rd, 1920, against the Columbus Panhandles. Here's a news article from that day showing some of the Triangles players. 4,000 fans would show up, tickets cost $1.75, and the players earned about $50 for the game. And Bud Talbot had returned as the team's coach. The Triangles would emerge victorious, although the game remained scoreless until the third quarter when the Triangles took the lead. They would add a second score to finish with a 14-0 shutout win. If you look closely at the positions in the box score, you can see how different a game football was then compared to today. You see the ends, tackles, and guards, and a center for 7 linemen, then a quarterback, 2 halfbacks, and a fullback. So the game was almost exclusively running, although we'll talk more about that later. The league's first touchdown was scored by Lou Partlow, who was also known to employ an interesting method of practice. He ran through heavily wooded country along the Miami River near his home in West Carrollton. He would run close to the trees as if picking a hole, and occasionally run full tilt into one of them to toughen up his shoulder for blocking. Overall, the team's inaugural season was a big success, with the Triangles finishing at 5-2-2. Frank Bacon, who scored the second touchdown in the inaugural game, was the league's leading scorer with 32 points. The Triangles only lost to Akron, which won the league after a de facto championship game versus the Decatur Staleys, who 2 years later would adopt a more recognizable name, the Chicago Bears. But the format of the new league was pretty wonky. Teams played different numbers of games, including some against non-league opponents. That final Akron-Decatur contest was a scoreless tie, and Akron was actually named champion by a league vote. There aren't many photos of the APFA in those years that I have access to, but here are a couple from college games which supplied many of the league's players. So you can see the old leather helmets, but according to one Triangles player, if it got too hot, we wouldn't wear helmets at all. As mentioned earlier, the game was almost all running, and an NFL source explains why the rules encouraged this. To legally pass, the thrower had to be at least 5 yards behind the line of scrimmage, and the penalty for that rule was a turnover to the defense. Plus, any pass that was incomplete and untouched by either team resulted in a turnover too. The ball in those days was also round and bulky, hardly suited for holding, let alone pinpoint accuracy. The rules wouldn't be changed to make passing easier until 1933, but the Triangles were something of an exception and a bit ahead of their time. So Al Mart, still quarterback in 1920, was an early proponent of the forward pass, which had technically been legal since 1906. He led the league in passing in its inaugural season, which was just 28 passes for 591 yards. But one old game report against a Detroit team said his passes come like a rifle shot. He gets the ball to his man faster and with more accuracy than anybody who has ever raced around on the Detroit football greens. The Triangles would post respectable records in 1921 and 22, but the subsequent years would be a struggle. They remained a team made up of locals, while other NFL teams like Curly Lambeau's Green Bay Packers began adding the best college players from all over the country. The Triangles would win only 5 games in their remaining 8 seasons, including just 2 from 1925 to 1929. Crowds dwindled at Triangle Park, leading the team to play mostly on the road to stay in business, where monetary guarantees far exceeded what they could earn at home. Many Triangles players still held their day jobs, and the team traveled on weekends in a rented Pullman car hitched to the back of a train so they could be home for work on Monday mornings. The ad on the right for a rare home game advertised visiting star Red Grange, and you can also see the prices for box seats, reserved, and general admission tickets. After winless seasons in 1928 and 29, the writing was on the wall. And in 1930, the team was moved to Brooklyn to become the Brooklyn Dodgers. The team's folding was said to be not widely mourned in Dayton. And it's interesting to trace what happened to the team next. So the football Dodgers played at Ebbets Field alongside the more famous baseball Dodgers. In 1945, they merged with the Boston Yanks, subsequently moved back to New York to become the Bulldogs, and then the Yanks again, who would be sold back to the NFL and given to a new ownership group to become the Dallas Texans in 1952. A year later, that team became the expansion Baltimore Colts, which moved to Indianapolis in 1984. The NFL does not recognize the connection between the Colts and the Triangles, however. As for Stork, he became NFL treasurer from 1921 to 1939 and NFL president from 1939 to 41. As for the stadium that witnessed NFL history, in 1941, Deeds and Kettering gave the park to the city of Dayton to ensure its continued recreational use as a gathering space. And here's a modern view. The part of Triangle Park that held the football stadium later became the baseball diamond Howell Field, which had its own proud history, including when Pete Rose played there for a Dayton amateur league in 1960. The old locker rooms used by the Triangles remained for decades and were being used for storage when one was moved to Carillon Historical Park in Dayton in 2012. The NFL doesn't recognize that team connection, but it does honor the history here in Dayton. So in 2019, in advance of the celebration of the league's 100th year anniversary, the league pledged to fund a new artificial turf field at Triangle Park. But concerns were raised over the site's past as a Native American burial ground, and after a site survey, plans were scrapped. But after a delay, the NFL Foundation did donate $500,000 to build a new turf field at nearby Kettering Field, which was finished in June 2020. So that's it for today. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a comment and take a look at my other Dayton history videos. You can read my writing on DaytonVistas.com and also join my Dayton history newsletter where I send updates of all of my work as well as live events. So thanks a lot and see you next time.